My ruthless mother-in-law and husband burned down my cafe while I was still inside the building. I was badly injured and lost consciousness. Thankfully, my staff rushed me to the hospital to save my life. When I opened my eyes in the hospital, a big surprise awaited me, something I never expected. Life was never perfect, but it was mine. My name is Sophia, and I've always been a dreamer. At 28 years old, I owned a cozy little cafe tucked in the heart of a bustling city. It wasn't just a business, it was my sanctuary, a place where I poured my heart into every cup of coffee and every smile exchanged with my customers. People often told me the cafe had a certain magic, a warmth they couldn't quite explain. I like to think that magic was just love. When I met Mark, I thought my life was finally complete. He was older than me, 35, charming, and successful in his work as a business consultant. He seemed to understand my dreams and supported me in ways I thought were genuine. We got married within a year of meeting, and I was over the moon. But looking back, I can see the signs I missed. Small things, like his subtle attempts to insert himself into decisions about the cafe, or the way he dismissed my ideas as naive. And then there was his mother, Vivian. From the start, Vivian made it clear she didn't think much of me. She was a retired lawyer, sharp as a knife and twice as cold. "Sophia," she'd say with that condescending tone of hers, "you really should let Mark help you more. Running a business is no place for someone with no formal training." I always brushed her off, thinking she was just overprotective of her son. I couldn't have imagined how far she'd go to prove her point. At first, life seemed normal enough. Mark and I shared a small apartment near the cafe, and he'd occasionally drop by to help out. Mostly, though, he spent his days working with his clients. Vivian would visit once in a while, always making subtle digs about how I was running things. "This place could be so much more," she'd say, her eyes scanning the cafe like she was already imagining her version of it. I shrugged it off. What harm could a few comments do? But things began to change. Mark started coming to the cafe more often, offering to handle paperwork or help manage the books. He insisted it would take some pressure off me, and at first I was grateful. It wasn't until much later that I realized he was laying the groundwork for what was to come. One evening, I came home late from a long day at the cafe. Mark was already there, sitting at the dining table with Vivian. Papers were spread out before them, and they stopped talking the moment I walked in. "What's all this?" I asked, trying to keep my voice light. "Oh, just going over some ideas," Mark said quickly, shuffling the papers into a neat pile. Vivian smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Mark's been helping me think about how to secure the future of the cafe," she said. There was something in her tone, something that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. I didn't think much of it at the time, but little moments like that began to pile up. Mark started questioning my decisions more often, suggesting better ways to handle things. Vivian dropped by more frequently, always with unsolicited advice. I began to feel like a stranger in my own business, but I kept telling myself it was all in my head. One day, I was cleaning up after closing when I noticed something strange. A folder of financial records was missing from my office. I asked Mark about it, and he casually said he'd taken it home to review. "Just trying to help," he said with that easy smile of his. I wanted to believe him, but something about it didn't sit right. The real crack came a few weeks later. I'd gone to the back office to grab a file, and that's when I heard their voices. Mark and Vivian were in the main seating area, their voices low but unmistakable. "Once we get her to sign those documents, it'll all be ours," Vivian said, her words cutting through the air like a knife. My heart stopped. "She's not going to suspect a thing," Mark replied. "Sophia's too trusting." I felt like the ground had been ripped out from under me. My husband, the man I thought I could trust with my life, was plotting against me, with his own mother. I stayed frozen for what felt like hours, their voices echoing in my head. When I finally moved, I slipped out of the back door and ran, my thoughts spinning wildly. That night, I didn't sleep. My mind replayed their words over and over, trying to make sense of it all. What documents were they talking about? How long had this been going on? Most of all, why? Why would they do this to me? As I stared out the window at the empty street below, one thing became clear. I couldn't ignore this. Whatever they were planning, I had to find out and I had to stop it. After hearing Mark and Vivian's conversation, I knew I couldn't let them know I was onto them. Not yet. My first instinct was to confront Mark, to demand an explanation, but deep down I knew it wouldn't help. He was already lying to me, and if I tipped my hand too early, I might lose the chance to uncover what they were planning. The next day, I acted like nothing had happened. I smiled at Mark over breakfast, went to work at the cafe, and even endured a surprise visit from Vivian, without showing the anger simmering inside me. But while they thought I was oblivious, I was carefully paying attention to every little thing they said and did. I knew I needed proof, something solid to protect myself and my cafe. A few days later, I found my chance. Mark had left his briefcase on the dining table before heading out for a meeting. My heart pounded as I opened it, terrified that he might walk back in any second. Inside, I found a stack of papers. At first, they seemed harmless, just invoices and spreadsheets. But then I saw it, a document with my name on it. It was a legal transfer of ownership for the cafe, with my signature already scrawled at the bottom. Except it wasn't my signature, it was a forgery. My blood ran cold as I flipped through the pages. Mark and Vivian had been planning to steal the cafe right out from under me. I snapped photos of the documents with my phone, every shaky click of the camera feeling like a tiny victory. But I also felt the weight of betrayal pressing down on me. How could Mark do this? How could the man I loved, my husband, be so cruel? I spent the next few nights piecing things together. The missing financial records, Mark's sudden interest in managing the cafe, Vivian's constant visits. It all made sense now. They'd been building their plan for months, and I'd been blind to it. But what hurt the most wasn't the scheme itself. It was the realization that my entire marriage had been a lie. Mark had never loved me. He'd only loved the idea of taking what I'd built. One evening, I decided to confront Mark. I couldn't keep pretending anymore. I sat across from him at the dinner table, holding one of the photos of the forged document. Care to explain this? I asked, my voice trembling but firm. For a moment, Mark looked stunned. Then his expression shifted, his face hardening into something cold and unfamiliar. You shouldn't have gone through my things, he said, his tone flat. Not an apology, not an explanation, just cold deflection. Don't you dare turn this around on me. I snapped, slamming the photo onto the table. You forged my signature, Mark. You and Vivian have been plotting against me for months. Do you really think I wouldn't figure it out? Mark didn't deny it. He just leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms like he was annoyed by my outburst. You're overreacting, he said. The cafe needs proper management, Sophia. You're too emotional to handle it. Too emotional? I repeated, my voice rising. That cafe is my life. I built it from nothing, and you. My words caught in my throat as tears filled my eyes. You're trying to take it away from me. You don't understand, Mark said, his voice suddenly softer. But it wasn't kindness, it was manipulation. This is for the best. You'll see. Before I could respond, Vivian walked in. Of course, she acted like she didn't know what was going on, but the smug look on her face told me everything. What's all this shouting about? She asked, her voice dripping with faux concern. You know exactly what this is about, I said, glaring at her. I found the documents, Vivian. I know what you're trying to do. Vivian didn't even flinch. Sophia, you're being dramatic. We're just trying to help you. Help me, I said, laughing bitterly. By stealing my business? By forging my name? How is that help? Her smile faded, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of anger in her eyes. You should be grateful, Sophia. Mark and I are trying to save you from yourself. That cafe could be so much more, but you're holding it back. I couldn't take it anymore. I grabbed my keys and stormed out of the apartment, my hands shaking with rage and heartbreak. I didn't know where I was going, but I needed to get away from them, from their lies, their manipulation, their utter lack of remorse. I ended up back at the cafe, sitting alone in the dimly lit space that had once felt like home. My heart was shattered, but I wasn't ready to give up. I didn't know how yet, but I was going to fight back. I had to. If I let them win, I'd lose not just the cafe, but a piece of myself. As I sat there in the quiet, the reality of my situation sank in. I was up against two people who had no conscience, no limits to how far they'd go to get what they wanted. But I also knew one thing for sure. They underestimated me. And that would be their biggest mistake. Sitting in the quiet of my cafe that night, I felt the full weight of what I was up against. Mark and Vivian had not just betrayed me, they were trying to destroy everything I had worked so hard to build. But I wasn't going to let them win. Not without a fight. I didn't know how I'd do it yet, but one thing was clear. I had to be smarter than them. The next morning, I made a decision. I couldn't face this battle alone. I needed help. So, I reached out to someone I never thought I'd need, a private investigator. His name was Dan, and though he looked like he'd stepped out of a crime novel with his gruff demeanor and wrinkled trench coat, he came highly recommended. I met Dan in the corner booth of a quiet diner, my hands gripping a folder of the evidence I'd already gathered. "I need you to help me prove what they're doing," I said, sliding the folder across the table. "They're trying to steal my cafe, and I know this is just the tip of the iceberg." Dan flipped through the photos and documents, nodding thoughtfully. "Forgery, fraud. These are serious accusations," he said. "If they've been at this for a while, I'll find out. But you need to be prepared, Sophia. This could get messy." "Messy doesn't scare me," I said, my voice firm. "Losing everything does." From that day on, Dan became my lifeline. While I focused on keeping up the appearance of normalcy at the cafe, he dug into Mark and Vivian's past. It didn't take long for him to uncover a pattern of deceit. Vivian had a history of shady legal dealings stretching back years. She had manipulated business contracts, forged documents, and even swindled money from a family trust. Mark wasn't innocent either. Dan discovered that he had been embezzling funds from his consulting clients and using me as a cover for his financial schemes. Every revelation felt like a punch to the gut. The man I had loved and trusted had been living a double life, and his mother was his accomplice. But instead of breaking me, the truth fueled my determination. I had to expose them for myself and for everyone they'd hurt. The hardest part was pretending I didn't know anything. Mark continued his charade, acting like the supportive husband while secretly working with Vivian to finalize their plan. Every time he smiled at me or casually asked about the cafe's finances, I had to bite back the urge to confront him. It was infuriating, but Dan reminded me that patience was key. "Let them think they're winning," he said. "The more confident they get, the more mistakes they'll make." And he was right. One night, I caught Mark trying to access the cafe's accounts on my laptop. He didn't notice me watching from the hallway, his face lit by the glow of the screen as he typed furiously. I didn't stop him. Instead, I quietly recorded the entire thing on my phone. It was another piece of evidence to add to the growing mountain. But things took a darker turn when Vivian's tactics escalated. She started visiting the cafe more frequently, criticizing every decision I made, and even trying to intimidate my staff. One day, she cornered me in the office, her voice low and threatening. "You're not going to win this, Sophia," she said, her eyes cold and unyielding. "Mark and I know what's best, and you're just in the way." I didn't respond. I couldn't afford to let her see the fear or anger bubbling inside me. Instead, I stared her down, refusing to give her the satisfaction of a reaction. As she walked out, I knew she was getting desperate. And desperate people make mistakes. Dan's investigation uncovered the final piece of the puzzle, evidence that Mark and Vivian had embezzled money from a charity Vivian had once chaired. It was a bombshell, proof of their greed and lack of morality. Armed with this, I filed a legal complaint. It wasn't just about protecting my cafe anymore. It was about holding them accountable for everything they had done. The day I handed the evidence to my lawyer, I felt a strange mix of fear and relief. The fight wasn't over, but for the first time, I felt like I had the upper hand. When Mark and Vivian were served with legal papers, their reactions were priceless. Mark tried to play the victim, claiming he didn't understand what was happening. Vivian, on the other hand, was livid. She stormed into the cafe, shouting accusations and threats. I calmly told her to leave, knowing that every word she said was just more proof of her desperation. As the legal battle loomed, I prepared myself for what was to come. I knew it wouldn't be easy, but I also knew I wasn't alone. I had Dan, my lawyer, and a growing network of allies who believed in my fight. Most importantly, I had my own strength, something I hadn't fully realized until now. The day of the trial arrived faster than I expected, but I was ready. As I walked into the courtroom, I felt a mixture of anxiety and determination. This wasn't just about saving my cafe anymore. It was about reclaiming my life and proving that no one could take what I had worked so hard to build. Mark and Vivian sat across the room, their faces a mix of defiance and nervousness. Mark avoided my gaze, while Vivian glared at me as if she could still intimidate me. But I wasn't that naive woman anymore. I had spent too many sleepless nights preparing for this moment, and I was determined to see it through. The prosecution presented the evidence I had painstakingly gathered with Dan's help. The forged documents, the embezzled funds, the laptop recordings, it was all laid out in meticulous detail. Watching their lies unravel was both satisfying and heartbreaking. I listened as the prosecution described how Mark and Vivian had stolen from charities, manipulated contracts, and betrayed countless people, including me. Every word was a painful reminder of how much I had lost, but it was also proof that justice was within reach. When it was my turn to testify, I took a deep breath and told my story. I spoke about the love and trust one had given Mark, the way Vivian had undermined me at every turn, and the moment I discovered their plan to steal my cafe. I didn't hold back. I let the court see my pain, but I also let them see my strength. As I spoke, I noticed something shift in the courtroom. The jury, the judge, even the audience, seemed to feel the weight of my words. For so long, I had been made to feel powerless, but now, standing there, I felt like I was finally reclaiming my voice. The defense tried to discredit me, of course. Vivian's lawyer painted me as an emotional, inexperienced woman who couldn't handle running a business. But every attempt to undermine me only strengthened my resolve. I had the truth on my side, and the evidence was undeniable. The turning point came when the prosecution revealed the embezzlement scheme involving the charity. It was a bombshell, proof of their greed and lack of conscience. The courtroom erupted in whispers as the evidence was presented. Bank statements, falsified reports, and testimony from former associates who had been victims of their schemes. Mark and Vivian's confidence crumbled before my eyes. For the first time, they looked genuinely afraid. The trial lasted several days, but the verdict was clear. Mark and Vivian were found guilty on multiple counts, including fraud, forgery, and embezzlement. The judge handed down harsh sentences, long prison terms that would ensure they couldn't hurt anyone else for a very long time. As they were led away in handcuffs, I felt an overwhelming sense of relief. Justice had been served, but more than that, I felt free. Free from their lies, their manipulation, and the pain they had caused me. For the first time in months, I could breathe again. Rebuilding my life wasn't easy, but it was worth every struggle. The cafe, though damaged by the fire Vivian had started, became my project of healing. I worked tirelessly to restore it, pouring all my energy into making it better than ever. My community rallied around me, offering support and encouragement that reminded me why I had started this journey in the first place. When the cafe reopened, it wasn't just a business, it was a symbol of resilience and hope. Every cup of coffee I served, every smile I shared with my customers, felt like a small victory. I had faced the worst, and I had come out stronger. Looking back, I still feel the sting of betrayal, but I also feel pride. Pride that I didn't let them break me. Pride that I fought back, not just for myself, but for everyone they had wronged. And pride in the woman I've become. The woman who refused to give up. The cafe is thriving now, and so am I. Every day is a new chapter, a chance to build the legacy I've always dreamed of. I don't know what the future holds, but I know one thing for sure. I'll face it with courage, just like I've faced everything else.